It's Ashley Bookishrealm, and I'm back with another video. As you can see from the title of this video, we are here to do my top 22 books of 2022 so far. So this is not the mid-year book freakout tag. I just do not have the capacity to do that tag. Plus, I was a part of Bethany's live show, Beautiful Bookish Bethany. If I can get through this, I was a part of her live show, and we actually did the entire tag live, which gave me a good reason not to have to actually sit down and record it. Because as much as I love that tag, I hate coming up with answers to the questions because it usually takes me forever and it takes forever to edit. It ends up being a really, really long video. So I was like, that's my mid-year book freakout tag. If you want to see it, yes, am I late with doing this? Absolutely. But when am I not late with stuff? I'm always late. So at this point, I feel like we should just be used to this and it should just be a thing. And so here we are talking about 22 books that I think have been great for the year so far. And let me tell you something. I had a very hard time coming up with this list. I had a very, very difficult time coming up with this list because I have read... I'm gonna look down right here at my Goodreads list, and this is just the stuff that I have reviewed. I think there's probably about 6 or 7 more books that I haven't reviewed just yet, but I've read and reviewed 256, potentially 262 books, at least 262 books having been read as of the day that I'm filming this. It probably will go up by the time that this video actually goes live. And so what's been so weird about this reading year is that I've read solid books, 3-4-star books, but like nothing that has really blown my mind, or at least clearly I came up with 22, but I have been expecting more. And then something else I noticed is like I haven't really had a lot of comics that have stood out to me this year. And not graphic novels, comics. And that's because I feel like I haven't been reading as many comics this year, which is disappointing because I'm like, what is going on? But I've been reading a lot more manga and a lot more graphic novels. So that kind of explains that. And so I was very shocked when I sat down to make this list. I was like, yo, like I might have a slightly difficult time doing this because I don't have anything that stands out that's like, whoa, where I was expecting to have a lot more options than what I had. And out of 250 plus books for the year, I should not have struggled to come up with 22, but I did. And so that says a lot about my reading year. I am not here to talk about stats or anything like that. I know that one of my main goals that I had for 2022 was to make sure that I read 100,000 pages for the entire year. Didn't matter how many books I read, I just wanted to make sure I made it to 100,000 pages. And so far, I am on track. In June, I was sitting at 55,000 pages, which is halfway through my 100,000 goal. So we are giving myself like some cushion here to maybe have some lower amounts in reading months. I know that I was reading a lot more page count wise towards the beginning of the year, then it kind of fell into a slump. So for a few months I was pushing, 12, 13, 14,000 pages. So yeah, so there's that. That's one of my biggest goals for the year, was page count and not necessarily volume number. And I've been reading a lot more like 450 plus page books this year than I think I have in previous years, which has really, really helped with that. And so I think that maybe by the end of this month, I may do a like goal check-in where I talk about that video where I did like 22 books on my 2022 TBR. Spoiler alert, I'm not sure that I've really touched most of that stuff. I know like 2 things I have been kind of working on, but for the most part, I have not. So that says a lot. But I'm not going to keep y'all here forever. Let's go ahead and jump into this list. I'm going to be looking down because I actually have a list typed out over here. And I did cheat a little bit. I'm not just doing, January, I was about to say May through March. My brain is all out of whack. I'm not just doing January through June. I did steal a little bit from maybe like the first couple weeks of July. Well, not really first couple weeks, it's not the first couple weeks, like the first week and a half of July. I did take, I think, one, because I just needed to talk about it again, which is kind of a spoiler alert, because in August, when I do my best and worst books of July, this book is probably going to pop up on there again. Not probably, it will pop up on there again. But let's go ahead and dive in. These are not in any particular order. This doesn't go from most favorite to least most favorite book, if that makes any sense. I just wrote them down as I was going through my Goodreads list. Okay, so the first one that I have on here is Hell Followed With Us, and I love this book. I love this book so much. I talk about it in great detail in, I think, my recent reads number 5 video, so I will link that up in the cards above. Check that out if you want to know more information about how I felt about it. But oh goodness gracious, so this is a YA horror fantasy book that follows a trans main character as he ends up leaving this religious cult because they've introduced this bioweapon not only into his system but also the entire world, and has created this whole apocalyptic type of scenario. He's on the run. He finds solace with this queer youth group, and he is trying to figure himself out and really work through what that religious cult has done to him. There is so many amazing elements about this book, especially thinking about how realistic it is in terms to people wanting to play God and to bring forth some type of penance, or should I say wanting to bring forth some type of payment from people for all the grievances that they have against God, which is, once again, I think, man playing into a role it had no business playing into. But there's a lot of commentary on that. I just ate this book up, but I will say to you, definitely check out my further, like, more in-depth discussion about this book in that recent reads, because I go through all of the content warnings which the author was kind enough to give in a, not a review, but they had posted it on Goodreads. I definitely would recommend checking those content warnings out. This book is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. It's gory. It's really, really gritty. And it's a lot. It is a whole lot. And even me listening to it, I was like, yo, this is a lot. This is a lot for me. And so I can't say this enough, y'all, because I don't want anybody walking into this book and not realizing like what they're getting themselves into. But I think one of the most brilliant things about this is that the whole idea of hope and perseverance are very seamlessly woven into this narrative. So while there's so much crap that these kids are going through, there's hope at the end of this tunnel of darkness. And I can't give this book enough praise. I really need to get my hands on a physical copy of it, because I don't know when I will reread it, but I know that I need to reread it, and it is one that I definitely want to sit down and digest even more slowly than I did before and annotate it. The next one on my list is one that has appeared on a list before, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess. If y'all did not know, which you should know if you've been here for any amount of time, but if you don't know, I read fantasy. I kind of dabble in sci-fi, but not really. But I shy away from adult fantasy, and this is kind of a difficult one because it is adult fantasy. In the library we classify it as adult fantasy, but it does have like YA crossover appeal. It's kind of like one of those in-betweens. And so for me, it's over 500 pages. I'm like, this is a fantasy, like, can I do it? And so I checked it out on audio and I listened to it, and it was amazing. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It is based on the myth of the moon goddess, and it follows our main character as she has to leave being under the care of her mother to protect them both. She ends up going into this empire, drafted into the military. There is a lovers to hate trope, which is very interesting. A love triangle done very, very well, which I don't say a lot about. I love the mythological or fantastical elements of it. I think it was well written, evenly paced, lots of action and drama that kept me going until the very end of the book. And I'm so excited because a sequel to this one is coming out in November of this year. It's going to be great. It's going to be so great. So if you haven't had the opportunity to check out Daughter of the Moon Goddess, I highly recommend it. The next one that I have on this list should be of no surprise to anyone. I believe that this was kind of on my it should have been in my quarter one, best books of quarter one so far. And so, I mean, I absolutely adore this author, and that is Ruta Sepetys, and the work that I chose for this year that I have read is I Must Betray You, which is about the 1989 Romanian Revolution, and it is good. It is a long one. I mean, long in a sense, like there's a lot of chapters, but the chapters are really short. It follows a main character who has become a, how do we say this? Because, you know, in my terms, I want to say like a snitch, but that's not the correct terminology to use. He's not a snitch, but I mean, he is a snitch, but everybody is a snitch. And that's the whole purpose of it, is that you have all these people who essentially have become informants, and it's from his perspective as an informant, and people were really rewarded for telling on each other. You had family members who were telling on family members and neighbors telling on neighbors, and it was a very harsh system that was set up. And it is a piece of historical, I guess, information that I think has not been captured in YA. I know it's been captured in middle grade. There is a middle grade book that I want to read that does talk a little bit about the Romanian Revolution, but I know in YA this is the first time that I have necessarily seen it done. Doesn't mean that it's the first time it's been done. It's the first time that I've seen it done, and I'm not surprised because Ruta Sepetys usually captures those tidbits of history that are not often discussed, and so I learned a lot in reading it. And there are certain twists in this that I don't think I expected to see coming, and so it was very enjoyable to see how Ruta Sepetys took this historical event and weaved it into a narrative of several different characters. There's also a section at the end of the book in which she specifically details what happens after the Romanian Revolution and kind of the state that the country is in as of today. And so I would recommend honestly checking out anything by Ruta Sepetys, but that was definitely one of my favorites of the year, and I'm looking forward to reading more by her. I think I have the rest of the books that she's written, but I haven't read them yet, but I will be reading them sometime soon. The next one that I have is also another historical fiction piece, which some of these, you know, I think it's kind of an even balance of like contemporary and graphic stuff and historical fiction. I've been reading a lot more historical fiction this year. Not really sure what that is about, but I was a history major in undergrad, so really, honestly, it's not that surprising. I don't even know why I even went there. But anyway, this next one is also another historical fiction, and it takes place in the 80s. It is called The Turning Point. Love this one. Wish this one was getting more buzz. Unfortunately, it is not getting as much buzz as I hoped it would get. And so here I am, constantly trying to talk about this book, wrecking this book, because I thought it was very, very well done. Like I said, it takes place in the 80s, and it focuses on a main character who dances ballet, very into dance, very much so into Prince. And so we do get some glimpses of Prince throughout the book, and she gets the opportunity to possibly dance for Prince because his studio, or somewhere, like he's in the same building or something like that. I can't remember exactly whether he's sharing studio space or what it is, but he gives the dancers in that studio the opportunity to audition to dance for him and when he performs. And so of course, her being so in love with dance, in love with Prince, she wants to take the opportunity to perform on his behalf. And so that's kind of like the basic parts of this book, because it's a lot deeper than that. So she has a very, very, very rough background, especially in dealing with her mother, a sibling, and her father. And I don't really like going into details about that dynamic because it kind of spoils it. I will say there was a content warnings for alcohol abuse because her father is an alcoholic and he's also her dance instructor, which creates a very strange relationship between the two of them. She also has a genderqueer love interest, which I thought was very interesting and very eye-opening for her. as a character, and so we get to see their dynamic, and it also is on the cusp of the AIDS epidemic, and so there's a little bit of discussion about that and the impact that it has had on the community that she lives in, or what will end up being a long-lasting impact. I just really enjoyed it. I love the 80s, and so to have a YA book set in a decade that I really love is something that I will forever be appreciative of. I think for some people it's going to be kind of hard to be like, oh my gosh, a book that takes place in the 80s is considered historical fiction. Why, yes it is at this point. I mean, what is it called? The Black Kids, which was not a favorite book of mine, but that took place in the 90s, and it is classified as historical fiction, and I feel some type of way because I'm a 90s baby, and so it's like I am not old enough to be a part of historical fiction, but in fact I am. The next one that I have on this list is an entire series, and that is Blood on the Tracks. I am a fangirl for Blood on the Tracks. Shout out to Izzy and Tamika for putting me on, because my god, I did not know what I was getting into. Izzy had told me several times, just read it. Like, there's no need to explain what it's about, what's going on, no nothing, just read it. And I went and I checked out the first 3 volumes. I had read the first volume and I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I finally dived into 2 and 3, and then I literally flew through whatever volumes my library had available after that, and it was just mind-boggling. I really can't say anything about it. Honestly, Blood on the Tracks is one of those series where it's like, you kind of just have to read it and trust people that it's going to be a very interesting read. I don't even want to say good, because good is just, it's not enough to really describe what the experience is like. For me, I will say that reading Blood on the Tracks was like watching a train wreck happen over and over and over again, that made me so uncomfortable and squeamish, but I could not look away. That was what my reading experience was like, and it caused me just a little level of stress for our main character. But from what I heard, I think Tamika said this during we were on a live show together or something like that, and Tamika had said that I think the first 13 or 14 volumes of the series is just a prelude. It's not even the core of the story. Like, I am so mind blown that I read up to volume 8 this year, and it is still the damn prelude. How is that possible that that's not even like the meat of the story? It literally is the introduction, and the introduction is wild. If we get any more wild, I just don't know what I'm gonna do. But I love the series. Fangirl. It is amazing. If you're looking for a dark, gritty thriller, sometimes it feels like it teeters on horror, I would definitely recommend checking out Blood on the Tracks. The next one that I have is Witchlings by Claribel Ortega. This was a pleasant surprise for me. This was my first Claribel Ortega book, and I really enjoyed it. It is about a young girl who is a witchling, and she's supposed to get sorted into her coven, and she ends up being with a group of witches that don't get sorted into covens. Like, they're kind of the outliers, and there's this huge mysterious element that happens, and the group of girls who are supposed to be assigned to their coven, they end up having to form a bond, and if they don't, then they are assigned to be, I forget the term that is used in the book, but they don't get to enjoy the experiences that everyone else gets to enjoy, and they become things like housekeepers or cleaners for those who have money within their community. I think it was a nice mix of like magical elements and mystery, and we get to see like friendships evolve. It was just one that I think is a great, substitute for, where I'm going with this. And I say that because a lot of times, from a different perspective, and I'm just going to dive into this quick, we're not going to make this a long-winded part of this conversation. I know that in our community, we are very active of how we discuss the series that I am not going to discuss. And so being in the library world, you can't avoid having people come up and ask for that series. And it's not something that you can deny when someone comes and they ask for it. Kids still ask for it. adults still ask for it, but what I have been actively attempting to do is to be able to provide recommendations beside that series. So if someone was to ask for that series and say, oh, I see you like this, I still have to provide you with this no matter how I feel, but why don't you check out this book as well? And so Witchlings definitely became a book that is a good recommendation to give along with that request. There are a couple others that I think I have read this year that also are good quote-unquote substitutes. The Marvelers by Danielle Clayton is a good one. I know a lot of people would rec Amari as well, but there are more of these coming out that I think are great ways to get kids to expand their reading outside of that particular series. So that's why, yes, I did say that. Okay, so I'm not going to say the title of this one. I'm just going to put it on the screen because I feel like I probably will get flagged for saying this one, so I don't want to say it. But I love this. I still haven't read volume 2. Volume 2 is sitting in a bag somewhere around here in the mass of books that is everywhere, all over the floor here. But I really enjoy this. This was a 5-star read for me. It is not like anything that people are expecting. I think when you see this, you're like, well, what is this about? And then when people describe it, you're like, oh, okay, like this could be a bit much, but it is so cute and charming and heartwarming, and you would never think, like, you'd be like, oh, I'm so invested in some of the relationships that we see. I thought it was the cutest thing ever, which probably seeing this cover and seeing this title, you're probably like, the cutest thing ever. It really is. It is the most adorable thing, and I'm so sad that it literally is only 2 volumes long. And so this is probably going to be another situation where I'm holding off not reading the second volume because it means that it's over with. So before the year's over with, I may go back, honestly, and reread the first volume before I pick up the second one. But it's about a group of men who are on this island fighting for power, and the way that they do is very interesting, and I can't really say what it is, like how they compete, but they literally have these elaborate casings over there. You know, everybody gets very good at these elaborate casings, and so you can use your imagination to figure out what they're attempting to do to each other and why they have to wear these elaborate and beautiful, some of them are really, really gorgeous, fixtures over their private parts. It is such a heartwarming manga, not what you would expect by the cover, but it really is great. Trust me on this one, you will enjoy it if if you're comfortable enough to check it out. Okay, the next one that I have on the list is If the Shoe Fits, and this was a surprise to me. I didn't know how I was going to feel about reading this one. I read it because I was sent a copy of the second book in the series by Jasmine Guillory. I'm kind of up in the air about that one because Jasmine Guillory and I just don't get along, and so I don't know how I'm going to feel, and that one has historically gotten lower reviews than If the Shoe Fits. But before I started that one or attempted to read that one, I thought that I would give If the Shoe Fits a try by Julie Murphy, and it is a Cinderella retelling. This is Disney's foray into adult romance books, and they're doing it by retelling classic fairy tales. Like I said, this is a Cinderella retelling where we've gotten a modern twist where Cindy is super into fashion. She does have a stepmom with step siblings, but they're her support system, as opposed to the Cinderella story where they're completely evil and horrible to her. And she finds love by going on a dating game show reality whole thing. And so the reason why I was nervous about this one at first and why I didn't expect to go into it loving it as much as I did is because One to Watch had kind of the same elements, not the Cinderella retwist, but we're looking at a fat plus size heroine who is entering a dating game show, and I absolutely did not like One to Watch. I thought that the rep was so bad. I thought the fat rep was bad. I thought that the diversity was very checkboxy. I did not like the game show elements of it. But this book, If the Shoe Fits, was at literally everything I wanted One to Watch to be. It literally was the epitome of everything that I wanted from One to Watch. I got in If the Shoe Fits. It was phenomenal. Julie Murphy, I think this is my first Julie Murphy book, actually, y'all. Unless I've read Julie Murphy in like a short story collection, I think this was my very first Julie Murphy book. I loved her writing. I loved it. The story was seamless. I loved her development of characters. I loved the fat representation. I loved how the dating game show was like, or reality show was like woven into the story itself. It was so good. It was so good. And honestly, I need to pick up more of Julie Murphy's books, because if her writing's like this and everything that she has ever written, like, my goodness gracious, it was just so good and so easy to digest. And I just love the spin and the narrative that she put on it. So I'm looking forward to the other ones that are going to come out in the series. I think Zarata Cordova has a next one, and it's supposed to be a Little Mermaid retelling. So looking forward to that. Number 9 on my list is The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. I have talked about this one fully, and I think this was in my favorite books of May. I love this book. It is so daggone good, okay? It is about a teenage girl who is getting switched over to Catholic school, and she is a lesbian, and she's trying to hide her identity from her mother, who is a strict Catholic. She's so concerned about coming out that she has been trying to save money in order to have a place to go when her mother inevitably kicks her out, because she is a lesbian. And she goes to this Catholic school where she definitely faces a whole lot of discrimination and racism. But I think what I liked is that even there, she still was able to find a very great support system in her friendships. And I think the romance element was really good. I loved it. But my favorite part of this book was the brother and sister relationship. I love the relationship that she had with her brother. They were so great, and it was the part of the book that sealed the deal for me. I love great sibling relationships in books, because I think I grew up as a single child that I love seeing what I always wanted out of like a brother or a sister or a sibling, like, and they are the epitome. They don't always get along and they have disagreements, but I think the support and love that they share between each other is such a vital part of how they survive, not only in their community but even under their mother's roof. And so, and also dealing with a father that had recently been deported, and so it was a lot, but it was so good. One of the best fucking decisions that I made all year was to read this book. And I mean, y'all, I need a physical copy of it. I need to buy a physical copy of it soon. And that's how I've been also managing my buying too, is like reading these books from the library, and then like, if I can potentially see myself rereading this book, I need a physical copy of it. And so that is definitely one of them. The next one on this list, which number 10, is also another one that I read in May that I love. These were like, I think I read these two back to back, and so it just made me feel like, holy crap, like this is we're getting some really great 2022 like debut releases or new releases, because this one is Joy Gottmy's second book, and they were hitting me with the good stuff. So of course this is Confessions of an Allergic Good Girl. I actually have my copy right here. Confessions of an Allergic Good Girl. I think, did I buy this like as I was finishing it or right after I finished? Either way, I think I bought this right after I finished reading it, and it's so good. It is a book that tackles purity culture, but from the perspective of a Black family. And so I think a lot of times when we think purity culture, we talk about purity culture and religion as it is tied to a lot of white communities, and religion has a very interesting role and place in Black communities as well. And so Joya Goffney handles that with so much freaking precision, accuracy, and gently enough that she's addressing the negative impact, but also not in a way that is demeaning of anyone's faith. I'm trying to figure out how to explain that in a way that makes sense, but that's kind of how I read it. And so we have a book here that's very sex positive. Loved it. I loved how sex positive this book was. We have a main character who is exploring her body, learning more about her body, and is questioning why she's having such a tough time like physically having sex. She physically cannot have sex. It is so painful every time she wants to have sex, and so that leads to a breakup between her and her boyfriend, and she begins this journey and wanting to figure out what's wrong so that she could have sex with him, that way she can get him back. But it ends up being so much more, and she learns so much more. I read this book and instantaneously was like, holy shit, I want to read this book again. And so that's why I bought a physical copy, because it's been so long since I've read a book and I've been like, oh, I need to read this book again. I literally just finished it, but I want to start from the beginning all over again. And I have not been this amp over a YA book in a very long time. Well, unless you count Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School and Hell Followed With Us. But it's been a minute, but y'all, I love this book. If you have not read this book, please read it. Please read this damn book. It is so good. The audiobook is also really, really great. I love the audiobook. So either way, you need to read it. The next one that I have is The Best We Could Do, which was a graphic novel that we read for the Realm of Comics book club. This was Bree's pick, and it was beautiful. Bree had already read this one and she loved it, and then I read it and it made me cry. I cried like a baby reading this book. It was so beautifully done. I'm going to link the discussion that we had about it in the card symbol above. I think that this also made it on my, maybe it made it on my best books of May. I can't remember if we read this in May or June, or how we did this. I think maybe we read this in June technically, because things got pushed back and we did it the first week of June. I can't remember, but I will link all the relevant information that I need to in the card symbol above. It literally is about a woman who is about to, or she's just given birth to her first child, and she is thinking about the relationship that she has had with her parents growing up. And so she explains the life of her parents from when they met, and raising her and her siblings, and the issues that they faced when they were in Vietnam, especially during the Vietnam War, and coming to America, and how being in so much trauma had impacted their lives and changed how they viewed themselves and each other and how they raise their kids. And I think the part that really touched me the most is at the end, she really delves into how much she did not want her trauma to impact her child, but only time would really be able to tell whether her trauma had impacted him or not. And so it was a difficult read for me, because I was raised by parents who had not sufficiently dealt with their trauma, and it makes me very emotional because, you know, I think a lot of times, and not all the time, but I think a lot of times parents have good intentions, but when you don't deal with your trauma and what you've experienced, you often do inherently pass that on to your kids, and it can be detrimental. And for me, it has been very detrimental to my life in a lot of ways. And so I am so scared, and the fact that I may be passing on some of my inherited trauma to my own child. And so it's hard finding that balance. You're so scared of how your child is going to turn out, and you pray and hope to God that nothing that you have gone through is going to make their life as adults more difficult than what it needs to be. And so I cried. Needless to say, I cried very, very hard and reading that one, but I definitely recommend checking that one out. The next one that I have on this list is another series which I didn't think I was going to include, because I had read the first 2 volumes and I thought that they were good. I enjoyed them, and then I read volume 3 and I was like, oh, okay. So this is one that I definitely think is going to be on one of my new all-time favorite series, and it is Sweat and Soap, which I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard about it. A lot of people now are picking up Sweat and Soap. It is such a great manga series. It is so heartwarming and nice, and it's great to see a shoujo series where like the relationship is just so healthy. Like, it is the cutest thing ever. It is about these two main characters who work in the same office, and our heroine has a perspiration thing going on, but she sweats a lot, and so she's always constantly worried about how she smells. And the hero is he's the soap creator, like the scent creator for the company, which is a company that puts out like soaps and stuff like that. And so he smells her, and he's like obsessed with how she smells, and they eventually start building an office romance, and we get to see their romance develop over the course of the series, and I love it. It is so cute. It is charming. It is like, they have their, like, I don't want to say they have a conflict. I think it's a lot of like external things that happen, but it seems like the two of them always know how to work it out with each other, and so it's good. It's so good. The next one that I have is a comic series, and this is one that I had heard about when it was coming out in single issues, and I had decided to wait until it came out in trade, and it is Stray Dogs. I will go ahead and say that if you are bothered at all by the mistreatment or harm of animals, this is not the one for you. I really caution people before they read that. It is darker than I think most people think, because when you see a comic and it has cartoon dogs on it, you're like, oh, this is probably going to be like, light, fluffy, whatever. It's animals, but it's actually darker and more strange than what you anticipate. And I honestly don't want to say anything about it, because I know, like, when a lot of people were reading this single issue by single issue, they would recommend, like, just read it. It's one of those, again, kind of like Blood on the Tracks, where, like, if I explain too much, I'll take the reading experience away from it. So it's mystery, also kind of thrillery, but from the perspective of the dogs. I would check this one out. Next on this list, I have In the Key of Us, which is a middle grade book that I did not really get the opportunity to really talk about on this channel. It follows two girls who go to the summer camp, is told in their alternating perspectives, and they both are dealing with their own issues. One is grieving the death of her mother, and the other is just dealing with some parental issues, not really understanding like what she wants to do with herself, and they form an unlikely bond. This is a middle grade sapphic contemporary. There are some content warnings for self-harm, grieving. To see two black girls at a summer camp and getting a sapphic romance that's middle grade, it was done well. It was done very, very well, and it's also one that I think I want to go back and really explore more and read more. Not read more, y'all. Read again. Like, bear with me. The next one I have on my list is Does My Body Offend You? This was a long one, and it is also told in alternating perspectives about two girls, one Latinx and one white girl, who end up going to the same school in Florida, and the Latinx girl goes to school without a bra on because she has really, really bad sunburn on her back, and so she goes without a bra, and apparently, like, everybody just loses their mind because it's like, okay, she doesn't have a bra on, and this is against dress code, and it just goes on and on and on. And so it causes some issues where our white main character steps in and is like, super activist, I want to let you know, like, does this really break the dress code? I'm gonna come in and not wear a bra. Are you gonna treat me the same because I'm white? And what I liked about this is that while you had a white character who was an activist, she got checked all the time about her white privilege and her ability to say and do certain things without consequences, and not really understanding the lived experience of being brown and having a curvy body. And that I appreciate it, because a lot of times when you come in and you have books like this and you have a white main character that is speaking and trying to be an activist and speaking above voices that need to be heard, or trying to shape the narrative in a certain way, they don't get checked on the fact that they probably should not be inserting their 2 cents and should not be pushing people to say or do certain things. And you want to do the right things, but you really are overstepping boundaries that you shouldn't be overstepping. And so I really appreciate appreciated that because I didn't think it was going to happen, and it did happen, and I like that. It definitely has some content warnings for sexual assault, which, if I'm remembering correctly, does take place on page, so I would keep that in mind, and it does affect our characters deeply, and they both go through quite a bit in this book and grow quite a bit over the course of this book, and lose themselves a little bit over the course of this book. But I think this book does a great job in creating this conversation about how young girls, especially young women, are forced to control their bodies in a way that makes other people feel comfortable, but it goes further into how Black and brown women and girls have it a little different than white women, especially in the way that their bodies are naturally built, and how they are hypersexualized, and how they are thought to be more aware of sexual related things sooner than their white counterparts. I like the whole discussion about that in the course of this book. It was a really good one, once again, that I didn't know how I was going to feel about it. I think I kind of went into this one a little bit blind, to be honest with you. Had no idea what the book was about, but I was like, oh, okay, you know, the audiobook is available, I'm going to check it out and just read it, which that's been a lot of what I've been doing this year, is just randomly reading things. So I'm like, oh, okay, this looks interesting, and not knowing what the book is about. So the next two that I'm going to talk about back to back are going to be two nonfiction memoirs, but I have really been enjoying my reads of nonfiction memoirs. I think the only one, the lowest rated one that I have, of course, is Kellyanne Conway's, and even though that's a nonfiction memoir, that also has like a political edge to it, so that's a little different. But I'm going to be talking about Unbound and Finding Me. Love them both. They're both 5-star reads for me. Unbound follows the actual creator of the Me Too movement, which I'm not sure how people didn't realize this, but I can get it when you have something that's created by a Black or brown creator and then taken over by white people. You often forget like where, like the baseline of like where it began. And so we're actually hearing from the creator of the Me Too movement. We're learning about like her experience growing up, being a Black woman growing up, and what that meant in terms of her body and being Black and growing up, and the amount of trauma, sexual assault, and rape that is experienced is openly talked about. And so I would be very mindful of that going in. I like that she talked a lot about how the Me Too movement grew. I like that she talked about how the Me Too movement still, even though it was created by a Black woman and was created to give voice to Black and brown women who often are not believed when it comes to rape and sexual assault, it has been monopolized by white women. And it's very true, because even with the Me Too movement, you know, the way that it took social media by storm, it still has failed. It's amazing, because it was created for Black and brown women, and it as a whole now still does not listen to those voices, which it's a thing. And so I like that she talked a lot about that. And I also like that she talked heavily about mistakes that she has made in her activism, and how she was so afraid to talk about her experience, and that it hurt her in building a relationship with a kid that was at one of the camps, and I believe the young lady's name was Heaven, and she really wanted to connect with her about some things that she had been through, and because she couldn't talk about the experience, Heaven kind of paid for that. She talks a lot too about the relationship that she has with her child and the mistakes that were made there. And so it's just a very raw, open, and honest narrative. Very, very short. I loved it. I think that it's something that a lot of people should read, because once again, I feel like a lot of people don't know that a Black woman was behind the creation of the Me Too movement. So and it really highlights how much of a problem it is that people do not know that a Black woman was behind the Me Too movement. And of course, the second one is Finding Me by Viola Davis. Love, 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 love. If I didn't love Viola Davis before, which I did, I mean, I loved her greatly before I read this book, I am even more in love with her after reading this book. Don't know how that's possible, but she also wrote a very raw, open, and just honest memoir about where she's come from. And this book for me was really like the epitome of understanding that people don't often look like where they've come from and their experiences. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It means that when you look at someone, you can't tell by looking at them what they've been through. And I think that that is something to always remember when dealing with other humans, and it gives us the sense of humanity that just because someone looks like they have it all together does not necessarily mean that they've had it all together their entire life, that they haven't been through traumatic experiences, that they've never experienced low points in their life. Because if you read this book, when I say fought tooth and nail to make it out of where she had come from, a blessing, because the deepest, darkest pits of poverty, talking about sexual assault, what she faced when she got to college, being a theater student, dealing with the nonsense of Hollywood, the colorism, the sexism, the racism of Hollywood, and still making it on top. I'm like, damn, woman. And I love that she talked a lot about the controversy and the conflict in her playing the role that she did. And what is the book that everybody is not a fan of? Oh my gosh, The Help. It's like I couldn't remember it to save my life. How there's a lot of conversation about the role that she took in deciding to be in The Help, and it's very good. I think you need to give this a listen. I wanted to read it when it came out, but I was very slow to put the audiobook on hold at my library, which is dumb because it's a lot of people's most anticipated release for the year. And so the host list filled up very, very quickly. And so it took quite a bit of time for me to be able to get my hold in, but when I did, I ate it up and loved it. It was great. It won. The next one that I have is going to be a picture book, and it is Dear Reader, which is one that I really enjoyed this year. It's 5-star read for me. I didn't know anything about this book. I saw it on Edivice and requested it as an ARC, read it as an ARC, and really loved it. It is a picture book about a young black girl who is going to the library and is reading all these stories, all these fantastical stories, and you know, logical and sci-fi and adventure, mystery, whatever, reading all these stories. But every time she sees a story with a black character, it's about depression, it's about hardship, it's about dealing with racism. And so she talks about the fact that, like, why can't she just write me a book where I'm doing all of these other things and it doesn't have to be tied back to racism or hardship or whatever. And so this is a huge conversation that's happening now, and really heavily in the black community, although I think that the conversation now is starting to spread into other communities where people don't want a diverse book that only focuses on the struggle of said community. I know, like, in the queer community, you don't want stories all the time that deal with the hardships of coming out. In the black community, we want everything that we don't always want to read books that solely deal with racism. And so that is kind of an element of conversation that's happening, I know, like within our community on social media, and is something that is slowly starting to seep its way into publishing. And so it was nice to be able to see a book from a children's perspective that really focused on the importance of what we call incidental stories, where you have black kids just doing everyday things without having to deal with the racism and hardships of reality. And so it's not to say that those stories should not be told, but it's all about finding that balance of knowing reality and also, like, black kids just enjoy doing everything that other kids enjoy doing as well. Like, our lives are not 100% all the time, you know, about racism. Not thinking about racism all the time. Like, is it a thing? Is it reality? Yes, it is. But I think that in some ways, by constantly focusing on that or hyperfixating on stuff like that, you take the innocence away from kids. And a lot of black and brown kids already don't have the luxury of keeping that innocence as long as their white counterparts. So why speed up the process? Why aid and abet it? So I enjoy that one. The next one on this list was it's two, because I'm having a difficult time deciding which one I want to choose, because they're both by Isabel Allende, and both of these were my first two books by her in an effort to read more translated books. I actually ended up reading Violeta first, and then I ended up reading The Japanese Lover after that. They're both great historical fiction stories. The first one follows a character over the course of 100 years, starting with the flu epidemic up into the COVID pandemic, and it's so many beautiful things that happen in between there. Just, we follow this character finding herself, answering to no one but herself, living unapologetically in her life, whether that's dealing with kids, her lovers, whatever. And she's writing these letters to someone about her life, and you find out at the end of the book who these letters are for, and her end of her life comes at the at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and it's just, everything comes full circle. Beautifully done. I was like, okay, so if this is what Isabella Allende is all about, sign me up. So then the second one, The Japanese Lover, is from the perspective of a caretaker who's taking care of this woman who who has a relationship with this guy. It's Japanese, and the relationship becomes really, really complicated because it's during World War II. Of course, because of the nature of what happened during Pearl Harbor, he ends up along with the rest of his family, getting sent to internment camps. And so we kind of get to see how their relationship plays out over the course of time. It is so beautiful and so freaking sad. And there's a touch of what I felt like was maybe magical realism in it towards the end, but it was so good. And so I didn't know how to decide between these two because I love them equally. I think they're both wonderful books, so I'm cheating a little bit with this one, but who cares. Number 20 on my list is Days on Fez. This is another manga series that I've really enjoyed, and what's interesting about Days on Fez is that it's not the most mind-blowing manga series that I've ever read. It really isn't. There's no really plot to it. It's about characters who like going to music festivals, and we get to explore their different loves of music festivals and music through each volume, depending upon where they're going. We get to learn more about the venues, the type of things that they have at the venues, and just really, really basic stuff, but it's comforting and it's relaxing. And so with everything that I've gone through in 2022, like, it's just it's been a semi interesting year for me. And so with everything that I've had going on in 2022, I am happy to have found a series that is calming to my spirit, and Days on Fez does that. And so technically, you know what, I could have paired this up and said, once again, like another, like, I'm having difficulty deciding between the two, is really Days on Fez and Laid Back Camp, but I haven't read as much of Laid Back Camp, and Laid Back Camp is longer. Days on Fez is only 5 volumes, and I've read 3 out of the 5, so I'm getting a bigger picture of the story arc for Days on Fez than I am on Laid Back Camp. But I will say that Laid Back Camp also has given me this feeling of like, this is like a very comforting read. I'm very relaxed, I'm very calm, I'm really digging this feeling, and so I would go with either one of those, but I went with Days on Fez because I've read more of it. Number 21 on my list is Almost Flying, which is one that I don't really think I've talked about. I don't think I've talked about this at all on my channel, but I did read Almost Flying this year. This is a middle grade book that focuses on a main character that loves roller coasters. So they inevitably spend a lot of time watching like videos where people give you the perspectives of like roller coasters. People would like wear the cams and then you could like ride the roller coaster with them, and so they know so much about roller coasters and like how many loops, the speeds, the different aspects. That was very interesting to me. I don't know why. I have this thing with roller coasters where I'm like, the thought of being on one really just, I'm like, but when I get to a theme park and I, get in line and I ride it, I get this adrenaline rush. And so I kind of got the same vibe from this character. And so they end up going to a theme park with their soon-to-be stepsister and stepsister's friends, and also another friend that they made that they kind of may or may not have romantic feelings for. It's kind of like this exploration, trying to figure it out. And so there's a lot of different things at play. This love of roller coasters, this conversation about identity, and then dealing with change in family unit, and dealing with the idea of like, parents getting remarried and having a blended family. It's so great. It was definitely just about having fun and learning to love yourself and adjust to these new things that are happening in life and allowing yourself to feel everything, whether that's happiness or anger or frustration. It was so good, y'all. It was so good. I really enjoyed that one. And the last one that I have on my list is How to Be Ace. How to Be Ace is really good. Bree and I decided that How to Be Ace is actually a more condensed and more accessible version, and they're not the same exact thing, but I think if someone wanted to learn more about asexuality, then the book that we of course recommend picking up is Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. Definitely recommend picking this one up. But if people struggle with reading nonfiction, and I won't say that this is like dense, but it is a lot of information and the text is small, and I know that nonfiction has a tendency sometimes to be a little bit more inaccessible for people depending upon whether you like nonfiction or not. And so we were thinking like How to Be Ace is definitely a more accessible, condensed version of what you would get out of Ace by Angela Chen, and it's good. It's really good. It's a graphic work that explores our author's experience growing up Ace and not knowing anyone else that was Ace, and really not having the term to use to figure out what was going on. Like, okay, all of my friends like sex, have partners, want to engage in physical touch, and I don't. And so it makes things very strange trying to force yourself into situations that you really don't want to be into because you don't want physical touch. And so finally having the words to describe that and finding a community of people that understand that was a huge thing for our author. They also struggle a lot with OCD and anxiety, so that is a content warning for there, because it is very, when I say depict it well, when I say stuff like that, especially for things like anxiety rep, it can make you feel very, very overwhelmed as well. And another book that I felt that way about was The Cost of Knowing by Brittany Morris. She did anxiety rep really, really well in that book, and you can struggle with that book because of how good the representation is, especially if you also have anxiety. So I don't want to say like it's a content warning, but it kind of is, just in case you do have trouble reading about other characters that have anxiety. This character has anxiety, OCD, and is autistic. And not character, the author, y'all, because it is the author's life. I'm like, the character. No, it is the author. This is all about the author. They have OCD, anxiety, and they are autistic. So I definitely would recommend checking that out if you're looking to learn more about asexuality and hear it from a first-hand experience, and you are not necessarily ready to jump into Ace by Angela Chen. That's a great starting point. Absolutely, I loved it. All right, y'all, so we made it through the 22 books, my top 22 books of 2022 so far. This list may change. I would expect it to change. We still have a little under half of the year to go, and so I'm sure that I'm going to end up picking up something that's going to take the place of some of this stuff on this list. But I mean, it's a pretty solid list. It's a pretty even list in my opinion. I think it's great rep of the different ages and just different genres, different storylines. I think I'm glad that I have some graphic works on here. If I end up reading more comics before the end of the year, which I will, you may see some of this stuff get replaced. And usually when I get to the end of the year, it becomes more difficult compiling a list because I've read so many great things. But so far it's kind of been a middle ground type of reading year so far. Not that that's bad or anything, but these are the books that I've read, the 22 that have been mind-blowing, and it was difficult to choose 22, not because there were so many, but because there were so few. All right, y'all, in the comment box below, let me know what some of your favorites have been so far of 2022, and also let me know, like, what are you looking forward to diving into for the second half of the year. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you never miss a video. If you're looking for ways to support my channel, there are links to my Amazon wishlist as well as my Patreon down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.